1789. At least 17 children vanished from church-run orphanages across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland. All were recorded as runaways or lost to illness. None were seriously investigated. Yet in the same time frame, a growing number of churches reported receiving relics said to originate from ancient Christian martyrs, most notably child saints. These relics, small bones, preserved tissue, even locks of hair, were presented in ornately crafted boxes stamped with the now familiar Whitmore signature. Congregations were told they came from trusted European sources. In truth, they came from local children, taken and transformed by the Whitmore family's quiet but unrelenting operation. The final years of the 1780s saw increasing whispers, quiet doubts among clergy and lay people alike. Stories didn't add up, dates on certificates didn't match the supposed age of relics, and more than one church elder questioned how the Whitmore family consistently produced rare European artifacts. Despite ongoing political instability and blocked trade routes. It was a newly ordained minister, Reverend Elijah Monroe, who finally raised the alarm. Assigned to a struggling rural church near the Maryland-Pennsylvania border in 1791, Monroe had received a relic supposedly from a 3rd century martyr donated by a well-meaning elder who had purchased it years earlier. Monroe, curious and cautious, consulted medical and historical texts. His concerns grew when he compared preservation methods to modern anatomical understanding and found clear inconsistencies. He quietly wrote to contacts in Philadelphia. By early 1792, 3 other ministers had come forward with similar concerns. That spring, with quiet support from a handful of skeptical clergy, Monroe traveled to the Philadelphia Historical Society and presented his findings. The sealed testimonies of 3 former apprentices, along with Thomas Whitmore's deathbed confession discovered years earlier, were reopened. Together, they painted a picture too detailed and too consistent to ignore. The Whitmore property was raided in June of 1792. Though the elder Whitmores had died some years earlier, William and Sarah remained on the estate, still maintaining the workshop. In the basement, authorities uncovered carefully labeled human remains, hundreds of fragments organized in locked cabinets, along with records of sales to churches across the eastern seaboard. Many of the names on those records belonged to still active congregations. William was arrested on site. Sarah, found in a locked upstairs room surrounded by religious texts and visibly unwell, was taken into custody but declared mentally unfit for trial. Over the following weeks, additional arrests were made. Clerics, traders, and merchants who had knowingly or unknowingly facilitated the sale and transport of the relics. Despite the horror of what was uncovered, public reaction was mixed. Some communities refused to believe the accusations, insisting the relics were genuine and the Whitmores victims of anti-religious sentiment. Others quietly removed their relics and severed ties. A few churches even buried the objects in unmarked plots, unwilling to acknowledge the full truth. The trial, held in late 1792, was swift and largely kept out of public view. Officials feared widespread scandal and unrest. William Whitmore was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment, dying less than 2 years later in his cell. Sarah was committed to a private institution, where she remained until her death in 1803. The remaining relics were collected by authorities and sealed in crates marked for indefinite storage. Though a few pieces are rumored to still exist in private collections, most were never seen again. Churches involved were given the option to publicly denounce the relics or quietly remove them. Many chose the latter. Today, most historians avoid the topic entirely. The Philadelphia Historical Society maintains a sealed archive labeled Ecclesiastical Artifacts, 1745 to 1792, access restricted by agreement with several church denominations. The physical evidence is buried literally and figuratively. Yet, traces remain. Small, decorative boxes in back rooms of old churches, parish records that skip entire decades, whispered stories passed down among clergy, and, most chillingly, the names of over 70 individuals recorded only as missing, never as murdered, whose lives ended in service of a twisted vision of holiness. The Whitmore story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, that religious fervor, when unchecked, can be twisted to justify the unthinkable, that institutions, built to comfort and guide, can become places of silence and secrecy, and that even the most pious reputation can hide a darker purpose. What do you think? Could something like this happen again, hidden behind stained glass windows and sacred symbols? Let us know in the comments if you found this story eye-opening. Share it with someone interested in the darker side of history. Like the video if you believe stories like these deserve to be told, and subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten corners of the past. Gravely ill in the house, and that William had left earlier that evening, though he refused to say where. He claimed Elizabeth was asleep upstairs, but a quick search revealed she was gone. Her room showed signs of being recently vacated, clothes missing, a trunk disturbed. Guided by Sarah's map, the group located the concealed entrance behind a false wall panel in the rear of the workshop. The hidden stairwell descended into a dimly lit chamber that immediately struck all present with its chill and silence. At the bottom, the men found a long, narrow hallway lined with wooden doors. Behind each lay scenes none of them would ever forget. The first room contained tables covered in waxed cloth, surgical instruments neatly arranged beside glass jars filled with preservatives. The next room held shelves, hundreds of them, each bearing small labeled boxes. Inside were relics, teeth, bones, preserved tissue, some with handwritten notations giving names, dates, and a signed church. Further down, they found the archive Sarah had described, a ledger meticulously maintained, confirming every transaction from the workshop's earliest days. Each victim was logged by name or description, along with where their relics had been sent and which church leaders had received them. Then came the final room. It was larger than the others, with high shelves stacked with partially processed remains. Suspended from the ceiling were 3 bodies, one clearly that of a child. Despite the freezing temperature, the stench was overwhelming. Several men wept, others turned away in stunned silence. Elijah Thompson reportedly knelt and prayed for nearly 10 minutes, unable to speak. By morning, the snow had begun to let up. Word was sent back to Philadelphia, and by that evening, a larger force had arrived to secure the property. Elizabeth Whitmore was never found. Some believe she escaped through the storm. Others suspect she perished trying. William was captured weeks later while attempting to flee across the border into New York. He offered no resistance and refused to speak during questioning. Thomas was arrested and cooperated fully, providing additional testimony that confirmed the family's operations, and named several church officials who had knowingly participated. He was sentenced to life in prison, dying a decade later in solitary confinement. Sarah, protected by Thompson and his allies, lived quietly under an assumed name until her death in 1819. Her journals, kept safe by the Quaker Network, were eventually added to the sealed collection at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. The scandal, once uncovered, was intentionally buried. Public acknowledgement would have caused widespread panic and irreparably damaged the reputations of powerful religious institutions. Most relics were quietly removed and destroyed. Churches involved received private censure but avoided public scandal. Today, few official records mention the Whitmore case, but if you visit certain old churches in Pennsylvania, you may still find traces and labeled reliquaries locked away in storage, archives missing years of records, or memorials to unknown saints whose names never appear in any official canon. And in the sealed archives of the Historical Society, the full story remains hidden, but not forgotten. A grim reminder of how far some will go in the name of faith, and of what happens when reverence turns into something else entirely. In the main house, Nathaniel Whitmore was too weak to have taken part in recent events. When questioned, Thomas revealed that Elizabeth and William had left hours earlier, taking several large trunks and heading west toward the edge of the property. Thompson immediately sent 2 men after them while he and the others stayed behind to press Thomas for the entrance to the underground chamber. After some resistance, Thomas led them to a workbench. When slid aside, it revealed a trap door built into the floor. The smell that rose from it was overwhelming, a sharp mix of chemical preservatives and unmistakable decay. Thomas lit a lantern and led them down a narrow staircase into a suffocating darkness. What we found below, Pearson later wrote, defies description. Yet the truth must be recorded, no matter how unbearable. The underground space extended beneath the workshop and beyond. It was a network of rooms carved into the earth and shored up with timber beams. The first chamber mirrored the workshop above, but the tools laid out weren't for woodworking, they were clearly meant for surgical work. Jars of liquid stood on shelves, and a drain in the center of the floor channeled runoff into the walls. Everything was meticulously arranged. Bradford noted detailed notebooks beside surgical tools, one open to anatomical sketches with highlighted sections and notes on preservation methods. The next room revealed the full horror of the operation. 3 bodies hung from iron hooks, 2 adults and a child, around 9 or 10 years old. All had been partially dissected with startling precision, their exposed tissue treated to a waxy, lifelike state. Even more disturbing was the third chamber. Thomas called it the archive. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined every wall, filled with small wooden boxes, each carefully labeled. Random checks confirmed each held preserved human fragments of bone, a piece of skin, an organ stored as a catalog of victims. At the room's center sat a large table. On it lay Elizabeth Whitmore's ledger, the record Sarah had described. Thompson later wrote, this massive volume documented in clear, clinical terms the acquisition of victims, the processing of remains, and the sale of relics to churches up and down the eastern seaboard. Each entry listed the price paid, the buyer, and fabricated backstories for the relics. Thomas, seemingly resigned, told the investigators that since 1745, they had processed 79 adults and 22 children. Their relics had reached more than 40 churches across 7 states, and the profits had been funneled into legitimate ventures to mask their source. When asked how they chose victims, Thomas's reply was chilling. Mother had the gift. She could sense which bodies would make the most powerful relics, the innocent, the devout, the ones who had suffered. She taught William to recognize them too. They'd watch from the pews, picking out those whose flesh might bring miracles. The investigation of the chambers continued through the night. Near dawn, a commotion upstairs drew them back to the workshop, where the 2 men sent after William and Elizabeth had returned. One was badly wounded, stabbed in the shoulder. William fought like a madman. They reported they'd found the pair at the abandoned mineshaft Thomas had mentioned, loading boxes from a wagon into the entrance. Elizabeth offered them money to stay silent while William circled behind and attacked. One of the men was killed instantly. The Whitmores escaped into the woods with what they could carry. A manhunt began at first light. Nathaniel was found still in bed, too sick to resist. He was taken into custody, alternating between religious explanations for the family's actions and bouts of confusion. 3 days later, the bodies of William and Elizabeth were found in a hunting cabin about 12 miles away. They had arranged themselves on a makeshift altar and taken poison. Notes left behind suggested they believed their deaths would somehow sanctify the relics they had salvaged. Thomas Whitmore was tried in Philadelphia in April 1788. The proceedings were kept quiet due to the nature of the crimes. He was hanged on May 7th after giving a full confession that confirmed the evidence. The biggest dilemma facing the authorities was what to do with the relics already in churches. After long debates involving both state and religious leaders, they chose to protect public faith and avoid panic. Judge William Bradford wrote in a sealed memo that churches involved need not bear the burden of public shame. Records were sealed for a century, and everyone involved was sworn to secrecy. Each church was informed privately and given the option to have the relics removed and buried, or handle the matter themselves, according to Thompson's final report. Most chose the latter, preferring to manage the situation discreetly. Some churches made a third choice. They kept the relics, knowing full well where they came from. Of the 43 churches named in Elizabeth's ledger, records suggest 17 kept the remains. Their reasoning, if the miracles were real, perhaps the victims had been sanctified despite the horrors. Others pointed to the financial and social gains their churches had seen. Removing the relics, they argued, would do more harm than good. Thompson found this reasoning deeply troubling. His final efforts went toward creating a private registry of all identifiable victims and the locations of their remains. This document was sealed with instructions to provide proper memorials. When the truth could finally be acknowledged that the Whitmore property was later destroyed, in what was officially recorded as an accident, though many believed it was intentional. The state reclaimed the land and sold it off in parcels. New owners were never told its history. Sarah Whitmore, whose testimony had brought it all to light, was relocated to Boston under quicker protection. She lived there until 1823. Her journal revealing a life devoted to helping orphan children. "I cannot undo what my family did," she wrote, "but each child I help is a small act of justice for those we harmed." The physical tools and notes from the Whitmore operation were supposedly destroyed, but rumors lingered. Some claimed medical schools or private collectors kept parts of their methods for study, especially their advanced preservation techniques. Medical texts from the early 1800s contain references to preservation methods eerily similar to the Whitmore practices, though they never name the source. The family's legacy might have vanished entirely if not for a courthouse fire in 1879. During document restoration, a clerk accidentally found part of Thomas's confession. Though quickly resealed, the story leaked and reached a reporter. A sensational but flawed article was published, drawing public attention before being dismissed as fiction by religious leaders. Lacking full access to the records, the reporter couldn't back up his claims, and the story faded. By then, most churches that had kept relics had either buried them quietly or forgotten their origins. The remains of the victims were scattered, some buried anonymously, others still sitting in church displays. Their true stories lost. In 1923, workers renovating the Pennsylvania Historical Society found a hidden compartment behind a bookshelf. Inside were the full sealed records of the Whitmore case, hidden decades earlier by Elijah Thompson himself. The society preserved them, granting access only to qualified researchers. Thanks to those records, historians began piecing together the full story and its ongoing impact. One unsettling discovery: many Whitmore relics remained in churches well into the 20th century. A 1967 survey found 11 churches that still possessed artifacts matching descriptions in the ledger. Most clergy were unaware of their origin, and reactions ranged from cooperation to denial. The Harmony Meeting House, where the Whitmores once worshipped, still stands, though it's long been abandoned. Locals say it gives off an eerie feeling, especially at night. Some claim to see a faint glow outlining the old workshop's footprint each year. Around November 17th, the anniversary of the first known victim. But perhaps the most haunting legacy isn't the relics themselves, but what they represent. That objects once thought holy were actually born of cruelty forces us to question how faith and belief can be manipulated. It reveals how institutions will sometimes go to great lengths to protect themselves, even at the expense of truth. If you've been drawn in by this unsettling chapter of American religious history, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Join our community as we continue uncovering forgotten truths and historical mysteries. Do you think everything was revealed, or could more relics still be hidden in plain sight? Share your thoughts in the comments. The Whitmore case forces us to face the uncomfortable fact that even faith can be built on deception. The miracles tied to these relics were real to those who experienced them, but the relics themselves were born from violence. Does that make the miracles any less meaningful? In 1992, ground-penetrating radar revealed underground structures on the old Whitmore land, remnants of the chambers and a filled-in mine shaft. Archaeologists confirmed the findings matched historical descriptions, but no human remains were found. The current landowners, disturbed by the discovery, refused further digging. The site was reburied and quietly marked as historically significant. The last confirmed Whitmore relic was removed in 2005 from a Lutheran church in western Pennsylvania. Hidden behind the altar was a velvet pouch and a letter from 1788. DNA tests confirmed the contents were human. The remains were buried in the churchyard under a simple marker, "Unknown Child of God." Finally at rest, the old Whitmore workshop site remains untouched. Crops planted there reportedly fail, and animals refuse to graze. Locals claim that on cold November nights, The ghostly outline of the workshop still glows faintly in the dark. If this story gave you chills, share it with someone who loves hidden history and historical mysteries. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell for more investigations into the past's darkest corners. The Whitmore case reminds us that history is often shaped not by what happened, but by what is allowed to be remembered. And sometimes, the hardest truth to face is the one buried just beneath the surface.